Hi, everybody. I'm glad you join us for this webinar. My name is Dan Treiman, and I'm the CEO of NEIBC, that stands for New England Israel Business Council. It's an organization, not-for-profit organization, that its mission is to strengthen the business relationship between New England and Israel. And for this webinar, we joined forces with MIT, and in particular with David Delev. David is an associate director at MIT International Science and Technology Initiative. And I'll invite David to say a few words. David, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Don. And thank you, Don, NEIBC, for taking lead on this webinar. It's great to be here with all of you, and of course, our presenters, Adi, Don, Dro, and Nitzan. So nice to see also some of our MIT alumni here, and even some Misty Israel alumni that took part in our program and did internships in Israel. You know, in many ways, this webinar itself, with the cross-organizational collaboration, MIT alumni, presenters across borders, dealing with a topic so important to both Israel, the US, and all of humanity, really exemplifies what Misty is all about. You know, we look at this world and all of the global challenges, climate, healthcare, education, employment, and so much more, and the tools that we can use to overcome them: AI and machine learning, entrepreneurship, and most importantly, the capacity to work together across cultures and borders to move towards solutions to global challenges. And this is what we at Misty hope to do through our many student and faculty-driven programs. We are one of the many MIT hubs for global engagement, and specifically the Misty MIT for Israel program, hub between MIT and Israel, for our student internship program in labs and companies in Israel. And I see some of our internship hosts even here with us on the call. Our global teaching lab programs, where our students teach STEM and entrepreneurship in Israel. And we have here Judy from the Ministry of Education on with us on the call. Our global seed fund, which support faculty-driven, student-engaged research projects. We also, some of our faculty here, it's great to see you all. And also classes that we've initiated or funded.
Thanks, David. We have a great panel. And I would like to invite each one of them to have give a quick introduction. And let's start with Nitzan. And the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nitzan Chaklai. I'm an MIT Sloan graduate from 2017. Today, I'm leading business development at a venture-backed startup called SIBO Technologies, which focused a lot on carbon markets, specifically soil-based carbon markets, which is SIBO is located here in Cambridge. Is also backed by Flagship Pioneering, which is a very big investor here in Massachusetts and in the US in general. And then later on, I will talk more about carbon markets and their effect and impact on I think, the agriculture ecosystem as we see that today. Very happy to be here.
Thanks, Nitzan. Dan?
Hi, Dan Grotsky. I'm LFM, which is now called LGO, and in other words, Leaders for Global Operations program. That's an MBA and an MS in my case in computer science. Did that back in 2002, graduated. So probably the oldest of the panelists here in terms of the when we graduated. And I am co-founder and chief growth officer of Groundwork BioAg. At Groundwork BioAg, we produce fungi that help plants to absorb nutrients and to grow better. And we also sequester carbon, so we're going to be talking about that as well.
Thank you very much, Dan. And Dror?
Hi, everybody. Dror Sharon. I'm an MIT Sloan grad 06. And I'm here as founder of Consumer Physics, which is an IoT company in the ag space. And currently I'm an entrepreneur in residence at Intel Corporation. Happy to be here. And thanks for the invite, Dan.
Thank you very much, Dror. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Adi Wagman. Adi is our moderator.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Adi Wagman. I'm an investor out of Israel. Started a few companies in the field, operating in this area for the last decade. Unfortunately, not an MIT alumni, but I can always hope for. So very happy to be here. I know most of the panelists since their early days in the field, and it's super exciting. And of course, one of the pioneer investor in Israel in this field. It will be a good idea to do a little bit of overview about the field because not everyone is familiar. So I'm going to do like a quick overview of the field. So when we started about why we need agri-food tech, so we're talking about more people in this planet. We're looking to do to be more healthy and to be much more health conscious. So are looking to understand where their food is coming from. In the other hand side, we have unfortunately the farmers, which are facing many challenges and constraints with less arable land, water shortage, pollution, raising cost material, climate crisis, and regulation. So when we are looking to understand why this whole industry started and why it's important, we understand that when we have such a gap, the main thing is that technology will be the only thing that can close this gap. Now, when we're talking about the agri-food system, we are actually talking about more than $50 trillion industry that is suffering from a lot of challenges, and it's actually a broken one. COVID is the main thing that showed us how fragile and let's say challenging is this ecosystem. We're talking again, one end on hunger, the second on obesity. We have a lot of food waste, the climate crisis, the soil fertile is lost, and again, the water. But the good thing is that we're talking that more and more and more money is pouring into this industry because those needs are real and solid, and investors are getting to understand it. So we're talking about more than $55 billion in terms of investment in technology over the last couple of years. And this is, of course, growing, and it's great. In terms of Israel, we are again the startup nation, and we have what we call the agricultural legacy. So our innovation comes from our constraints. Israel is mostly a desert, 60% of it, and we always have been very short in labor, far away from export markets. So we have to take care of ourselves. When we combine these two, the startup nation with the agricultural legacy, it creates a very vibrant ecosystem. We're talking about more than 500 companies in only the agri-food tech in Israel. And this is, of course, very exciting. It's positioned Israel to be second in the world in terms of innovation. So this was a quick overview about the field. And now I am handing over to the panelists to present their company's background and to understand why agriculture is so exciting. So, Nitzan, you want to start?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So thank you, Adi, and thank you for this introduction. So just before getting started, we have a quick introduction, but though like in our prep for this webinar, Dan was kind of suggesting also for all of us just to present ourselves a little bit more. So just a little bit about myself. As I was saying, I'm a Sloan graduated from 2017. I'm currently leading business development here at a Cambridge-based startup called Sibo Technology, which is focused on on soil-based carbon markets. I've been in the AgTech space for most of my career, almost like around from 2012. where I worked when I started working for a company, an Israeli company called Adama. Today is part of the bigger Syngenta group. Worked also at Bayer, and in the last couple of years, I've been like kind of moving to the startup world and seeing like more closely from like what is like to be in the AgTech space from an entrepreneurship perspective. And I think in recent years, also with the general interest, and when you see what like really what drives this market and what could continue to drive this market forward, I think my interest became much more focused on sustainability and even more on fintech solution. You know, fintech is rising generally outside of agriculture, and I think the opportunity to bring fintech, which is also part of the carbon market emergence that we see in the recent years, is starting to look to one of the most exciting opportunities in the space. For the New England community, so I'm here more of a local. I live in Brookline for the last couple of years. I'm married, and I also have like an amazing 2.5 years old daughter. So jumping to what we are here to talk about, for at least for my part, you know, when we talk about climate change and where agriculture is mitigating and how we are dealing with the global climate crisis that is like is coming to the world, I think the emergence of carbon markets that you might all like heard that is part of like as a general buzzword is really just giving now a new form of a business model or a monetization pathway to deal and mitigate with the challenges that are coming towards us. Now, in my title, I use like version 2022 because carbon markets are not new. They have been here for many years. Even like if people who are more like closer to the space might even recall, there was even a big buzz around carbon markets in the 90s that eventually kind of had a big crash together with the financial crisis in 2008. Though in recent years, we're starting to see a new interest and focus on these markets once again. And now one of the questions, like, is this time, is it for real? Is it like, are these markets are really like bring a new opportunity for agriculture and for like other industries in general? Now, and I think when we start to look on like what happened in the market and different type of trend, I think there are really interesting signals that shows that like that this time around things might be different. I think it's initially like we do see some kind of like, even though most of these markets are still perform a completely voluntary basis, they do have some kind of like beginning to see some regulatory push. Obviously, there was a climate Paris agreement that were like countries themselves need to do some kind of commitments. But I think the more interesting signals are actually coming from the private sectors. First, we see like more and more companies, really every day there are new companies that have this new type of net zero commitment or emissions reductions commitment in different ways and shapes. We see financial institutions who are really driving for that trend as well. I think there was like BlackRock is one of the most interesting, I think, player in this space who are actually starting to ask and push their CEOs, the CEOs that companies are investing to put very specific targets around emissions reductions and net zero goals. And we also see a very interesting trends coming up from consumers. And these are where like, you know, the very known Gen Zs and millennials who are now like what they have in their head are climate concerns. And what are we doing to our environment? And this stuff, like at the end of the day, are affecting the entire supply chain from consumers to the actually companies who want to have them as their customers. As a McKinsey report, there's a very famous McKinsey report that was published about a year ago in the space, have predicted the demand for carbon credits will increase by amount of like a factor of 15 in about by 2030. And when you look about the prices of carbon credits, and we'll talk about a little bit more of that in a second, the prices in the next 10 years are expecting to jump around 5 times higher. If today a carbon credit is being sold, again, there are challenges around the pricing as well, but if today a carbon credit is sold around $20 per credit, in about 10 years time, McKinsey predicts it will go up for $100, and they even published some estimation that goes even higher to $150 per credit. So there is definitely signals that the market is getting bigger, although at the same time, I think it's very important to mention that it's a very nascent market. I heard someone was telling me that he feels like this is a kind of the very early days of Bitcoin or blockchain. So tons of uncertainty, tons of unknowns of how these markets are actually going to evolve and what will be the players and how exactly that would work. But there's definitely an interesting trend and demand that is getting bigger with every day that goes by. Now, when we talk specifically about agriculture and where's the opportunity around soil-based carbon, essentially, I think there are kind of two perspectives we should think about. First of all, agriculture by itself serves as a very significant component in causing the emissions that we all want, that the countries are putting some goals to reduce. So as an industry by itself, agriculture, if you want to meet these goals, has to find a way to reduce emissions. The other perspective, though, where the opportunity for soil-based carbon is coming from, is actually for the understanding that soil could serve as a kind of a carbon sink, that as another path to sequester carbon and create offsets or insets that could be used by companies within the agriculture supply chain or outside of it. What's the opportunity in its essence is whether specific type of practices, such as a different type of tillage, reducing tillage or having not tilling the soil at all, planting cover crops in between season, and reductions of input and specifically fertilizer could help to sequester carbon and reduce emissions. It's also important to say that aside from the actual carbon market, as I was saying, like this new type of monetization business model that are rising around these practices are not new. In essence, actually, they're the core and kind of the more basic and traditional practices that growers has used to do, which conventional agriculture kind of took them away because they affected productivity. However, when you look on like productivity trends in the US for the last decade, more than a decade, you actually see that how the new type of conventional agriculture have putting a lot of risk for the future of the agriculture here in the US and obviously all over the world. And going back to these practices, again, completely aside from the carbon market opportunity, actually could bring a lot of value for growers and for the soil in general in a future looking term. Now, again, this very kind of short introduction is a high level intro for this space. Though I do think like when for like people are interested in this market, it's important. I think there are, in the last year has been started to have been 3 different segments that have been emerging within the space. The first one is the most common segment, that this is what usually is being mentioned when we talk about carbon markets. And here is really to generate offsets. Offsets means that the companies, whether it could be like an energy company like Shell, could buy credits that were generated from whatever they want, even in agriculture, even though they have nothing to do with agriculture, and use that to offset its emissions that are being caused by its own operation. The other segment, which is starting to become even more interesting for the agriculture and food sector, is what it's perceived as insets. Insets are emissions reductions that are happening within a company's supply chain, which means for agriculture, that goes to all these agribusinesses and food companies that research has shown that around 80% of their supply chain emissions are caused by agriculture. Recently, I think it's about a month ago, the SEC has started to have some initial regulation around companies, companies that are being they have to report on their own supply chain emission, their scope 3 emissions, which actually put the food companies in a very interesting place around the need to report on their agriculture supply chain emissions, and probably in the next stage to also to start to reduce them, again, from a regulatory perspective and not just on a voluntary. So when you start to think about the demand for these credits, and here for insets, that seems like a very indicator for a growing trend. The last thing around this kind of opportunity in carbon markets in general, it's what we start to see in the market around premium pricing. And here that goes to some kind of like low carbon commodities, or I think in a very similar way, like we think today about organic or high quality wheat, for example. This type of a trend, we started to see that with ethanol, which like in California, there are already some regulation in place for producing low carbon ethanol. Although, and I think another interesting boost that happened to kind of that segment has happened for like the last couple of months when the USDA have announced and now started to have announced their $1 billion grant for new partnership for developing climate smart commodities, which when the goal of this USDA initiative is really to start a market for climate smart commodities, more sustainable commodities, while at the same time the USDA have not really published any specific guidance of what does it mean. So definitely that is another indicator and another really push that we see in the market to create this new type of a segment.
One quick question.
Yeah.
How much do you think that carbon markets will change the value chain or the business model for farmers? Because as probably you know, it's a new revenue stream and a very lucrative one, but it has its challenges. So how do you perceive it?
Sure. So I will touch it here because I think like when, you know, we saw the nice stuff about carbon markets and how that pushed forward, but at the same time, for implementing and scaling carbon markets for agriculture has a lot of challenges. It has challenges in general, though, like I think when it comes to agriculture, they are even becoming even more bigger and raise questions. So as I was saying, initially, I think, you know, the way it could affect growers, yes, we are seeing here a very interesting opportunity for a new monetization pathway for growers and for agribusinesses and also AgTech companies in the space. It's a new way to actually monetize. Every time for the last decade, we talked about collecting a lot of data about fields, about crops. Here, there's a way to take this data and generate a new type of financial asset out of it. For farmers, there's now a new term in the field calling like carbon farming. Growers could go and actually change their practices plan in order to generate more credits, aside for like having the actually yield and productivity on top of their mind. Though again, focusing on your question, for growers, I think there's still a lot of uncertainty here that evolve. And that is also one of the biggest challenges in this market for soil-based carbon. To start to do a carbon farming, growers have to have a very big, high investment upfront when the prices of the credits today are still not sufficient. When you look on commodities prices, especially after the last year, growers still continue to think about how much yield they should produce in the coming season, and not and the potential incentive or the upside that they can get from generating carbon credits in a couple of years is still not on top of their head. There are also some more structural issues, again, focusing specifically on the US market, around the subsidies and the regulatory framework around what really incentivize growers. And also, in general speaking, how growers are really thinking about their business, which is a very season by season, much more thinking on the short term rather on the long-term opportunity. There are also other type of challenges in the space around protocols and standards. As I was saying, the markets are most of them are completely voluntary. The standards are very vague, and even when they are more clear, they are also very complicated. So when we start to think about the scaling opportunity, there are challenges around how you actually monitor for specific practices, measure their impact, get all the data that is required from the growers to prove that they implemented one practice or another. This is exactly where the opportunity is also, this is where like my company is coming into place for technology company, how you make the grower engagement process much more simpler, streamline their enrollment process into specific different kind of programs, collect data more efficiently, and then use technologies like simulation or computer vision to monitor and verify practices. I think like another interesting thing when you start to think like who can be the winner or what it really takes to win this market, I think at this point in time, credibility and trust is one of the most important things. And that goes both to get to be credible and to get the trust of a grower, but also from the other side of the market for carbon buyers. When there are no protocols and regulatory framework around, the concerns around greenwashing is one of the biggest fears that corporates have in their mind. No one wants to be accused by having like false claims or wrong or misguide their investors. So really, how can you assure that the credits that you buy are legit and happen and actually are proven to sequester carbon? Just quickly before we end up, just a little bit about SIBO, the company that I'm working at. As I was saying, we're a science-based technology company based here in Cambridge. We're a Series C round backed by Flagship Pioneering. And we have a big team sitting here in Cambridge, but also other teams around the States. It's a completely American company, not an Israeli company at this time around. Though I'm very proud to be the Israeli person at the American startup. About what we do, we are, as I was saying before, we are really taking a very software approach to our offering. At the end of the day, we are positioning ourselves as being the tech engine to support other big players who already have the credibility and the trust in their hands, and really support them on both sides of the requirement to get that, to generate an offering at scale for the carbon markets. On the one hand, we are providing a full monitoring and verification platform solution to verify practices and monitor the impact. But then we also invest in developing tools to enroll growers in a much more streamlined process, use technology to collect the data and simplify the process as much as possible for them.
So, Nitzan, thank you very much. I have a few follow-up questions for this great presentation. So, how do you compete? What separates you from other companies in the field?
So I think here, first of all, there's all about these. On the one hand is the technology itself, right? There's like questions around accuracy, credibility, whether technology can actually work. Can you really make the life of a grower simple? So it's really just to develop the best-in-class software solution, and also to develop the best-in-class science teams and technology behind the scenes. Generate the models that would be considered by the market as reliable and accurate. And we're investing as part of creating this credibility and trust. We are now gonna, like SIBO is about to register its program, and as part of it, it's modeling by one of the known registries for carbon credits, which this is part of like the NGOs that I mentioned before, that's the only kind of a regulatory or stamp of approval that happens out there. The other side, I think it's more today, it's around the business model. How do you work? Do you support big players? Do you start to generate, you are starting to have your own program? I think we are taking an approach that I really believe in, and which I was saying before. I think like to win this market, it's all about credibility. I think for startups in this space, it's very difficult to get both the growers' trust and and also the market trust, right? From a company and big corporates to buy carbon credits from you that they would feel that they're feeling comfortable with. And here we're taking an approach of like, let's choose also the right partners that we want to work with that have this trust in the market and support them as their engine, rather just try to compete them and create our own solution.
Following on a question from the audience, is there a proof for this carbon offset to be actually carbon decreasing from the atmosphere? Is this like a proven science that it's working?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The proof that is happening today, there are kind of like the technology that's being used is first of all using models that have been proved, using a lot of academical research. SIBO is using a modeling approach that has been developed in Michigan State University for the last 30 years. We've published academical work around the world. But then like the proof is also go out to the field and actually do soil sampling. There are questions around which one can actually scale. Can you scale soil sampling in a cost-effective way, in a way that you can use that? But at the same time, can we use like soil samples today and over time use that to get more assurance around using models and simulation models? Aside from that, like in general speaking, yes, there's like a lot of research that has been done around the ability for these practices to sequester carbon. At the same time, there are challenges around, the common practice of agriculture. Can you make a grower not to till his fields for a couple of years? Because that's the whole point, taking the carbon and put it in the soil and never let it go out again. And here that is more, I think, in my perspective, a more question of incentives and what makes sense from a grower from a financial perspective.
Okay, thank you. If I will have more time later, I will ask a few more questions. I want all the panelists that we will hear. Dan?
Hi. So I'm Dan Grotsky, co-founder, chief growth officer at Groundwork BioAg. And actually, Nitzan's last few words were a great segue for my presentation, because and I'll remind you of what she said, and as we go through my presentation, I'll kind of I'll touch on that point again. She said that the key here is to bring the carbon into the soil and to keep it there, despite the fact that there's tillage and conventional agriculture and a lot of release from the soil, and that's really a place where we excel, and we're bringing something very innovative. First, a few words about me. I'm a serial entrepreneur, American Israeli, been kind of back and forth. Also MIT alum, and I started out my career in software and AI, enterprise software, information systems, and back in 2008, decided to make a career switch. Decided that I wanted to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, and moved over to really decided that every venture that I found, every organization that I work in is going to have to be a significant part of making this world a better place, for lack of a better term, and I believe that we've really found an amazing way to do that with Groundwork BioAg. So let me tell you a little bit about the company. Wait. Okay. So some of the biggest problems in our lifetime are, and I won't repeat some of what Adi already said, but I view agriculture and food in our generation as perhaps the largest challenge and the largest opportunity of our lifetime that is posed for humanity. The mere fact that we have to produce as much food in the next 40 years as we have produced in the last 8,000 years, just assuming business as usual, is to me daunting, and it's quite a challenge and quite an opportunity. Wherever there are huge challenges, there are huge opportunities. We have to do that while we're polluting our lands, while we're changing our climate, and polluting our water sources. And so all of that combined means that we basically have to produce more food on less acres. We have to reduce our carbon footprint. We have to deal with climate-related stress. We have to use less fertilizers. And in general, we have to move into more sustainable farming practices, such as those employed by regenerative agriculture. And groundwork bioag really goes to address a lot of these challenges, and I'll explain how. So what we do is we produce what's called mycorrhizal fungi, mycorrhizal inoculants. Okay, these are fungi that live at the center of any healthy rhizospheric ecosystem. In other words, the area around the roots of the plant. These fungi penetrate the root of the plant. They physically reach nutrients that the plant root cannot reach, and chemically break them down, mobilize them, and bring them into the root, where they're readily accessible for the plant. This is how plants grow in nature, okay? 400 million years, this is how plants have been growing. In agriculture, first we kill everything and then we try to grow plants. And so what we're missing is you know, we've essentially broken the ecosystem in agricultural lands, and we really have to bring some of this life back into the soil, especially the beneficial microbes that help the plants out. And so that's what we do. We produce these inoculants cost effectively. We're actually the first company in the world that's cracked the code of how to produce them cost effectively. And we bring them back, we bring the life back into the soil. And the mycorrhiza actually acts as a bioplatform for all kinds of other beneficial microbes that help plants as well. It's the most significant organism in the soil. It's actually the largest organism in the world, even though it's microscopic, because an entire field or an entire forest will be one organism that's all intertwined and joined. So that's in essence what we're doing. This is what it looks like underneath the microscope. So if you look at these large, the large lines, those are plant roots under a microscope. The very, very thin lines, those are hyphae that make up the mycelium. Okay, that's the body of the fungus. And then you've got those little circles, those are spores. They make up it's almost like seeds of a fungus. Okay, so a healthy rhizosphere will have all of this in it, and bacteria will be traveling back and forth on these hyphae, feeding the plant with all kinds of other wonderful benefits. Our products include all three of these, so they'll include spores and hyphae and plant roots. It's what's called a whole inoculum. This is what it looks like in terms of the host of benefits that you get. Just like with people, when we eat better, we feel better, we're healthier, we're more productive. Same goes for plants. And so really when plants are mycorrhizal, they get a whole host of benefits, from resilience to stress, to higher productivity, to soil aggregation, because the plants and the fungi will hold the soil together very nicely, and even some disease resistance, etc. For the farmer, what we're talking about is higher yields, savings of fertilizer, and that's a huge deal, especially this year with what's going on in chemical fertilizer markets. Resilience to stress, both abiotic and biotic. And we directly address 4 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. And I will say, in this same context that we have a very, very huge part in carbon sequestration. A little bit about the company. For some reason, I lost that slide about the overview of the company, so I'll push some of that in here now. We're 70 employees, 2 production sites, both in Israel, one in Mazor, which is near the airport, or near Petah Tikva, one in Ein Tamar, which is northern Arava. We are currently closing a VC round with some heavy hitters that you all know the names of. And this will be a roughly $20 million round. The existing investors include Israeli and American and European VCs, as well as a few angel funds. A disclaimer, a D is actually one of those investors in AgriNation, which is the fund that she runs. And we also have more VC and Middleland Capital from the US and IBEX investors. So there's a host of some good VC money involved. The product line that we're talking about, we have a few product lines, but the one for agriculture and the one that's relevant for this conversation is called Rutella. And it really, the products are differentiated by application method. So we have products that will go into a nursery scenario for vegetables, for instance. We have products that are for trees, products that are more designed for dusting. But really the flagship product is Rutella X, which is our most concentrated product, which is meant for seed treatment. Okay, so if you look at the field behind me, for instance, which is half inoculated with Rutella, actually with Rutella F in this case, but same idea. It's also a seed treatment product, and half untreated. And I'll let you figure out which is the treated side and which is the untreated side. Then the only way you can actually effectively cover a field like this, a soybean field like this, which is very large and not easy to, you can't distribute it on the whole field. The best way to do it is to do it through a seed treatment, which is like a little, it's a very thin film coating on the seed. The growers plant the seeds that are already coated with the mycorrhizal fungi. As soon as the seed germinates, it triggers the inoculation of the plant, and the fungus will grow together with the plant. So that's really the most effective way to get out there. In terms of our competition, we're one of the largest producers of mycorrhizal fungi in the world today, and really none of our competition gets to these concentrations. Thus, they can't really play in this market, in the mainstream row crop agriculture market. They're all in the high value crops, the cannabis, the organics, etc. And so in that sense, we find that this market is some sort of a blue ocean for us. In terms of directions for the future, we're doing a lot of work now regarding using our products as a bioplatform, as I mentioned before, involving additional bacteria in the mix in our products. These are mycorrhiza helper bacteria, is how they're known in academia. These are mycorrhiza that either help the bacteria that either help the mycorrhiza or are aided by the mycorrhiza. But in any case, there's a synergy between the bacteria and the mycorrhiza. And we're going to be including, actually, as of this year, in some of our products, we're already including some of these beneficial bacteria that can do all kinds of other things, such as nitrogen fixation, such as phosphorus solubilization, auxin production. If these words don't mean anything to you, just suffice to say that, you know, bringing more nutrients into the plant and helping the plant out where it needs them most. So Nitzan spoke a lot about carbon sequestration in agriculture, and what we find is that it's really not, it's a lot more difficult than emissions reduction. Okay, when you're talking about carbon credits, it's easy to prove that you've taken a car off the roads, or that you've reduced emissions from a power plant, or things like that. What's really hard to prove is that you've sequestered carbon in the soil, especially since as soon as you till that soil, you're releasing most of it, because you're oxidizing the soil and creating CO2 that just is released. And really what we found as we look into this whole puzzle is that while it's the plants that photosynthesize carbon, it's actually the mycorrhizal fungi that sequester the carbon permanently in the soil. And that sentence that I just said now is a huge claim, and it's not one that anybody else can make. There currently are no methods that are known to permanently sequester carbon. And that's where regenerative agriculture comes in. So regenerative agriculture is all about maintaining the microbes in the soil over time, because those microbes, especially mycorrhiza, are known to sequester carbon. And as they continue to do so, you get more and more carbon in the soil. The problem with that is that regenerative agriculture is hard. Okay, it's being very slowly adopted, and everybody's talking about how great it's going to be in 2050. But you know what? I don't know about you. I'm going to be an old man in 2050. And I don't like when companies talk to me about climate change and they talk about 2050. We need much, much faster solutions. Okay, Groundwork BioAg, last year, we covered 1 million acres. And we're growing at a pace of 2.5x every year. So this year we should be doing 1 million hectare, okay, 2.5 million acres. And we're assuming roughly 100 million acres around 2030, okay? And this will be significant carbon sequestration. What happens is, yeah.
Dan, I want to take advantage of the fact that you have been an entrepreneur and the company have been to the space through the let's say the last years. So I want to ask you two questions, like where do you see the main challenges in agri-tech for startups? And as you see this industry developing, where do you put your bets? Like if you were to start a new company in the field, because I believe that most of the people that are in this Zoom meeting really don't know that Dan is a serial entrepreneur, and he were looking for many, many years to find the right technology, the right company. And in his team members took some heavy technology from Vulcani and managed to make it a very successful company. So you hold a very unique experience in this aspect. So for you, what are the main challenges and where you would put your bets?
It's a great question, and actually I kind of touched on some of that as we spoke, but I think in terms of the challenges in ag tech in general, one of the main challenges is that the whole clock speed of the industry, to use actually an MIT term, the industry clock speed, the whole clock speed of the ag tech industry is pretty slow. It's dependent on a biological clock speed. Okay, so everything that's done is dependent on waiting for the plants to grow. So you do a trial. Okay, we'll meet next year. We'll see what what the yield is like. You do, or if it's in trees, it's completely ridiculous. And the entire industry has to play according to that clock. And so your sales cycles are pretty long as a result. The way we, and actually a few other companies in the industry that we know of, the way that we've dealt with this is we use that time and those slow cycles to build a global presence. And let me see if I don't have that slide here, but we are currently selling in India, Brazil, US, Canada, Ukraine. We have a representative office in China now. We're selling in Japan and New Zealand, Kenya, South Africa, France, Germany. Okay, so we've really built a global presence. Not too many companies, we were founded in 2014. Not too many companies our age and our size can exhibit such a global presence, and we did that for a few reasons. I mean, it's against all, it's against entrepreneurship 101. It's kind of defocusing. But on the other hand, it's diversifying in a beautiful way. And we kind of have to do that because we've got regulatory processes that are long, sometimes years. We've got sales cycles that are long, usually years. And so we have to plant seeds, so to speak, in various territories in order to make sure that we are not caught with our pants down in any one of these territories at any given time. So we've done that, and I think it's something that we've really done that helps us succeed. In terms of where I would put my bets, where I'd place my chips in this market, I think, obviously, I'm a big believer in the carbon credit space. I think as Nitzan showed very eloquently, this market is going to be huge. It's going to grow tremendously, and ag has a great role to play in this market. And currently, it's completely nascent. There's really nothing going on. I mean, there's a lot going on, but not commercially yet. It's very nascent. I also think a lot of the I'd like to see a lot more doing and a lot less counting, a lot less talking, a lot less projects around it. We're in the field with a product, a physical product that changes the crops, that makes them better. I always look for that. I want to see the real value added. When you can do that with a real product and show real results and real yield improvement, then you've got something that I think is defensible and can be a sustainable competitive edge.
So thank you. In this note, I will be happy to pass the mic to Dror.
Hi, everybody. What I was asked to do is to talk a little bit about IoT in agriculture, which is kind of not the carbon side, not the biologic side, but rather more on the where electrical engineering, I would call it, and traditional IT meets agriculture. So a little bit about myself. I'm now at Intel, working on incubating deep tech, hard tech ventures, mostly touching AI, computer vision, hardware and software, and developer tools. Before that, I was founder, CEO at Consumer Physics. We'll talk about the company and kind of my insights from IoT in ag. I was also a VC for a while. I was at 2 VC-backed deep tech startups and was also in the Israeli Air Force. I have an MBA from Sloan and electrical engineering from the Technion. And I'm based in California. So generally, what is IoT in AgTech? And I'm going to use Consumer Physics or SIO is the product name as an example here. So usually the IoT related space talks about real-time farm analytics. And in our case, we went literally from a core technology that has to do with the photonics. So you can actually see the sensor here. We built around it a full device and then connected it to the cloud through smartphone apps. When we started the company, IoT was not a word, but just to remind everybody, especially in the context of ag, these are all connected devices. And in agriculture, in the field, you can't always get a connection. So these are all connected devices. In our case, these were NIR sensors, near infrared sensors, and we had to build a full stack. Now, when I mean full stack, what we really wanted to do is to take large benchtop sensors. This is for example, how it's used to measure agriculture commodities and reduce the form factor and the cost by 1000x. So that was kind of how we started. And hardware is hard, as the saying goes, and it also means you need to raise a lot of money. So today, the company has raised over $50 million from leading both technology and agriculture VCs and family offices and angels. So this is not kind of for the faint of heart. Agriculture in general, I think, isn't, but for sure on the hardware side, it's not something that you can just take off like many other related companies. Just in terms of how we started, we went from a consumer device that kind of checked the agricultural commodities on the consumer side through a version that went into embedded devices. And right now, the company for the last few years is actually selling into the AgTech sector with various form factors, mobile applications, and enterprise analytics. We also, through this, got a lot of awards. So I think the fact that you have these consumer products, and all of us, when you think of how you interact with your enterprise products, you actually expect them to be highly consumerized. They need to be friendly. They need to, you expect good design. So this has been happening for a while. In terms of what does IoT and where do you kind of meet, where do the farmers meet them? So specifically consumer physics is focusing on major commodities. So for example, soy, corn, wheat, specialty commodities like cocoa and coffee, and fresh produce. And the trick here is to bring the large, long-term, expensive lab to the field. So something that the actual farmer or agronomist can get an actionable insight and actually have a decision, whether it's to harvest, whether it's to deploy a certain chemical, what have you. And this is throughout the food supply chain. So anything that you eat, unless it's a farmer's market, actually touches multiple hands in the supply chain. And in terms of the business model, the one that has worked for us, and I think, if you can get to it, that is awesome. It's not always the case, is by selling the hardware and then annual subscriptions on top of it. So actually creating a SaaS business. The big question always is distribution. So who are the customers and how do you actually get to the farmers? I think, most folks try to get to the customers to the end farmers from the get-go. That is actually a very tough proposition in ag. And what we found is that it's actually worthwhile to create the trust, as Nitzan elaborated, and the initial kind of value prop with the big players. So what you have here is kind of some of the largest players in the ag world today, as well as some of the smaller players, because ag is a regional, kind of highly fragmented industry, like Dan said, right? It's not something, rarely can you kind of find a very big company that controls a lot of them, even though there's a lot of consolidation here. So my big takeaways, from the journey that I've seen with consumer physics, number one, like Dan said, what can you actually prove to the farmer? If you take all of the ag tech companies, if you take all of the yield improvements, you would have, thousands of bushels an acre. And we all know that that's not real. The reason is ag is regionally fragmented. What works in one soil type and one weather type might not always work on a specific field, even 300 miles away, and people are aware of that. So what can you actually prove to the farmer? That's number one. Second is, the farmers, they care about much more than just your product. It's usually a holistic lifestyle. They have many, many things kind of that is top of mind for them. So how do you really make sure that they actually care about the product that you're selling? And I think there are ways to crack it, but that's kind of just needs to be top of mind as you go through the ag tech journey. And then a big thing from my perspective on cracking this industry, like Dan mentioned, the distribution and the business model is something that is very difficult for, especially for folks that come from what I would say regular IT, right? Software or hardware, whether it's consumer electronics or enterprise. This is a very fragmented industry. People actually love the high touch sales. You know, you come with your pickup truck, the salesperson goes with their pickup truck. I don't know how many of you have actually, you know, spend time in flyover country in the United States or, you know, Central Valley in California, but these are very traditional sales models. They expect the salespeople they expect to know them. Some of these folks have family connections that go back 3 generations, right? You walk into a farm, they might tell you, yes, you know, I'm a 5th generation farmer, I'm a 4th generation farmer. So these are very high touch sales models. And also the way people buy and the channels and incentives of this entire industry is pretty opaque. So many times what the farmer pays, you know, is not really what it costs to make and not really what it costs for the sales guy to actually sell. And there's a lot of back and forth incentives in the channels. So understanding exactly what you're selling and who has the right incentive to actually push the product is a big part of this industry. So that's kind of what I would say on the business side. On the product and technology side, especially on the IoT sector, there are multiple elements that need to get right. And we found, at least I found in my journey, that, you know, it takes a few iterations to do it. One general kind of comment is that the fusion of sensors and AI, which is huge today, I think, in almost any vertical, whether it's in Industry 4.0 and others, is especially true in agriculture. And as Dan said, because it's so fragmented and it's so geographically diverse, you actually need to get the data from all over. So data is a big deal. You know, it means, you know, it waterfalls down to the algorithms. How do you create them? And then obviously, do you have any differentiated hardware? Is it all off the shelf? What do you do about cloud access? Can you architect the software to actually work with remote, you know, farmer in the field where not necessarily they have all of the connections? And then in our case, where you want to actually provide insights to the farmer, but also to a more broader dashboard. So when you think of a farmer's dashboard, they have multiple sources of information and they have multiple people that provide that information. So can you provide the right integrations to the right, usually agronomists, but not always. It really does depend. So that's in terms of the kind of just how to think of IoT and AgTech in general from the journey I've seen in IoT. And then looking a little bit into the future, what are the major trends that I see in IoT? So one is autonomy. John Deere, which is the biggest kind of agricultural machinery manufacturer in the world, just launched a fully autonomous a combine tractor at CES, at the Consumer Electronics Show, right? So at CES 2022, they launched a fully autonomous tractor and combine. So what does that autonomy mean? First of all, many more sensors. They need to be cheaper, a lot more data, and the advent of robotics taken to the next level. When I went to the Technion, when I attended the Technion, one of the biggest department for robotics was actually not mechanical engineering, where you thought you would usually find it, was actually the agriculture department. They had these huge spaces with huge, you know, machines. So robotics is becoming more and more ingrained in the, you know, AgTech IoT space. Indoor farming is here to stay. I don't know how many of you followed the trend, but Plenty, which is one of the biggest one, raised hundreds of millions of dollars. They now trying to grow berries and lettuce very close to the source. And I think they just announced a deal with Walmart. The industry is very consolidated and is getting more consolidated every day. But if you follow this, then you know that both food tech and alternative protein players are actually emerging and coming in fast, which changes the dynamics of the supply chain. And if you follow the kind of breadcrumbs trail, you see that some of the biggest players that I've mentioned before actually are going into the alternative protein space in their specific parts of the stack, in the agriculture stack, which means, you know, more data, more specialized algorithms, how do they optimize this? The next generation farmers, again, I've interacted with hundreds and hundreds of them. There is a, you know, on the farm, you have the folks that are just there for, you know, decades, and they're, you know, in their 60th or 70th season, right? So that's kind of one type of farmer, and sometimes they make all the economic decision. But many times you have new farmers, or, you know, there's already been a succession plan, and somebody who is a little bit more kind of Gen Zer or willing to work from the smartphone or from an iPad. And that's a totally new type of farmer, even though they're still old school. So they are very much willing to experiment with e-commerce, with data, potentially new distribution models. Even the most progressive ag tech kind of distribution models that I've seen so far on the field, they still, in the end, get all of the farmers in one place, you know, 1 day or 2 days a year to go and talk to them. And they do one big convention in, you know, usually it's either in Illinois or Nebraska, but then they have the local ones that they need to sponsor, and you bring out the grill and everything. So even though these exist, in the end, it's still very much old school. And then lastly, I think the macro, you know, global environment, Dan mentioned Ukraine, you know, I think that's probably a short-term squeeze. So short-term in agriculture is 2-3 years, right, that we will see. But what does that mean long-term? I think people have started to really look at optimizing the supply chain, and for sure the population dynamics that we all know for the 2050 is there. I think with that, yeah, that's all I had. I'm always happy to help, whether it's AgTech or kind of usual suspect technology entrepreneur. So you can find me either on Intel or on Twitter. With that, thanks a lot, and I'll hand it back to you, Adi.
Thank you, Dror. It was very extensive and very deep analysis. So the question for all of you is pretty much the same. You're talking about farmers, you're talking about applications, but how do you see the job or the position for the large AgTech and agriculture and food companies in the ecosystem? How much do you see them involved? How much do you feel like they are contributing to your effort? How much they are part of this game in terms of investment, in terms of involvement, in terms of support? Can we expect from these guys for more in terms of startups? How do you see like the big guys in the industry?
So maybe I'll start just because, you know, and I'll hand over the mic. So first of all, we were very lucky with the big players, and my continuous contact with some of them tells me that they are, one, under extreme pressure, right? The consolidation comes for a reason. They are under extreme pressure, and the entire food supply chain actually is not a high gross margin, you know, supply chain. So they are always looking for differentiated solutions. However, they actually behave very similar to the farmers. You know, it's a show me business. They're okay to take small bets initially because it's so diverse geographically. So they're willing to do small bets initially, but to get really a program going, it's a matter of years. It's not a matter of, you know, it's not a 6 to 9 month sell cycle the way, you know, sometimes you see in enterprise software and some of the other products I was with. So they are very much aware of the trends. And again, if you follow the breadcrumbs, you can see that some of the huge players have picked up the alternative protein, for example, message. They're starting to work with, you know, the food tech companies. So that's my kind of sense. The last thing I would say is it's always great to have their customers ask for solutions. So, you know, if you get somebody on the retail space to talk about anything that kind of relates to what you are doing, that pull can create tremendous, you know, interest from these players. But it's very hard to do. But if you can, then that's another way to arouse their interest. Over to you, Dan. I saw that you're out there.
Yeah, I think a lot of these large companies, and I agree with everything George just said regarding the consolidation, etc. a lot of these companies are really profiting, based on the whole concept of the green revolution way back when, and they're entrenched in that. And what we're finding more and more today is that while these concepts provided great short-term solutions for yield improvement, long-term, they're really messing up agriculture and messing up the world in a big way. And we really have to wean ourselves off of a lot of these wonderful technologies that were great in the 80s and 90s, but today we're really finding that they're problematic in many ways. And some of the larger companies are able to embrace some of these new innovations, but just like in any industry, they typically it's the large companies that move the slowest and are not really embracing it fast enough. I think this holds true for many of these technologies. Even some of the monitoring that we were talking about, whether it's soil sampling versus remote sensing, whether it's yield monitoring or just doing things by hand, or in our case, whether it's looking at chemical solutions versus biological solutions. And I think even though the trends are pretty clear, a lot of the main trends are there and are happening, and you go to any analyst report, you'll see where things are headed. I think a lot of the large companies don't have the ability to move as fast as they see things moving. And again, that happens in many industries, but I think especially in agriculture, because as I said before, the clock speed is pretty slow. And when the clock speed is slow, the time it takes to embrace a new technology is also very slow.
Thank you, Nitzan.
Yeah, thank you. And I would not repeat a lot of stuff that I think that I agree with what Dror and Dan were saying. I will answer that, I think, from a little bit from a different approach. And from from a startup perspective, the role of this big strategic. And I think here for a startup in AgTech, and at the end of the day, we are talking about technology companies in the agriculture space, technology companies and technology startups who want to grow and scale fast. And as Dan was saying, agriculture is a very slow moving industry with very slow moving beasts, which are all these strategic. But at the same time, in my perspective, they are also the key to unlock scale. And I think Dror was touching the point of how difficult it is to sell per grower, like in the agriculture space. Every grower is unique. Every grower has its own sales rep that he trusts for many years. It's not that there's one solution that will fit all the growers in Iowa, not to mention in one county in Iowa, or not to mention one even city within that county. And when you go even to different regions, we're talking about completely different markets and market structures and players and different dynamics. And I think here, for the ability for a small startup to scale and bring to the technology to many markets in a relatively large pace, we are still talking about agriculture and a lot of dependency on seasonality. I think the strategic have a really important role with any kind of business model or go-to-market approach that smaller companies are developing. And obviously there's a lot of also differences within this big companies, like food companies, commodities, and chemical companies and seeds companies are different. But I think, again, depends on the company and depends on the startup and the technology it wants to bring into place. I do think that finding the right business model and go-to-market approach to work with these strategics are crucial to generate scale and business success.
If I may, I think this is also a difference between Israeli AgTech startups and American AgTech startups. What we see a lot of in the US in this space is some very well-funded companies that are very low in revenue. You know, they have a great vision that, but they're not actually moving as fast and executing on that vision as fast as they should, and so their vision changes, and since they're very well funded, they're also at very high flying valuations, and are having trouble justifying those valuations. And there are a few companies out there. I don't think I need to name any of them, but I think, you know, those in the field probably know who I'm talking about. On the other hand, if you look at least some of the Israeli startups, it's all about execution. And you know, on the one hand, we don't have the same access to capital that American startups have. But on the other hand, our revenues are relatively high. You know, and I can speak for us. I mean, we have our revenue to valuation ratio is a lot higher than most US AgTech startups in the same space.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Guys, and my lady Nitan, I think it was very, very insightful, and we got here a few perspectives for various approaches to how you innovate around AgriTech. Major Dan, the one that put us together. I think that we had a great panel, and I'm giving you the mic right now.
Sure. I would like to thank everybody, the panelists and the audience, for participating in this fascinating webinar. And I wish everybody a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you all.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Amazing. Thanks so much, everyone.
You're welcome.